It took me until my 4th year of teaching to realize that I was actually part of the problem. Classroom management did not come easy for me as a teacher. I really struggled with it. And when I realized that I needed to make changes, that's when I started to see the changes take place in my classroom. In today's video, I am sharing the secret to giving consequences and how to avoid the biggest mistake that I made as a teacher. If you're new here, I'm Rachel Vincent, and I share tips on running an effective and efficient classroom so that you can get more things done and still have time to teach. The biggest mistake that I made as a new teacher was I handed out warnings like they were going out of style. I would have a behavior issue and I would warn them, which I still do, but then I would warn them again, and then I'd warn them again. And then I'd say, if you do that again, you're gonna get the consequence. And they would do it again, and I would say, I told you if you were gonna do that again, I was gonna give you a consequence. Now, if you don't do it, I'm gonna give you a consequence. And it repeated over and over and over again. And because I actually never gave the consequence, my students learned that they could continue to behave poorly. And then sometimes I wouldn't warn at all or just go straight to the consequence, and then it left them confused. And when students are confused and don't know what you expect of them, they are going to err on the side of we can get away with it and misbehave more than they would if they know that the consequence is coming. So how did I fix this? Well, I learned, first of all, that I needed to make sure my expectations were clear, and I needed to start my year a little bit better than I had been doing, and really set up those expectations so students knew what to expect. Then, if the problem continued, I needed to restate the expectation. So for instance, if a student blurts out and the expectation is to raise their hand, the first thing to do is to actually ignore the behavior but restate the expectation. So you might say something like this: I really like the way that Tyler is raising his hand, I'm gonna call on him. So that does two things. It first rewards Tyler for following your expectation, but also reminds the student who is calling out that that is not how they get to answer the question. The next thing you can do is remind them of the consequence. But this is where you as the teacher need to do a little pre-work and know what your consequences are. I am a firm believer that the consequence should fit the rule broken. So for instance, if a student is cutting with scissors and destroying things and they shouldn't be doing that, I wouldn't take recess away for cutting with scissors. I would take the scissors away and they would not get to use them. So when reminding of the consequence, a student calls out, you might say something like, remember, if we don't raise our hands, we might have to lose a dojo point, or whatever your classroom management or consequence may be. Just sort of insert your classroom consequence into that spot. Now, typically, one of those two will fix 80% of the issues you might be having, reminding of the expectation and reminding of the consequence. But there are always some cases where you do those things and students still aren't following directions. So in those cases, just give the consequence, whatever you've decided ahead of time. So if it's losing a dojo point, when that student for the 3rd or 4th time has called out, give the consequence. Don't say anything to the student. Don't say, that's it, I told you, you're blurting out there, you're gonna lose a dojo point. No, just take the dojo point and then get right back into your lesson. One of the things I like to make sure I do is that I praise in public, but I give consequences in private. But sometimes when you're teaching, you just need to give it quickly and move on without calling the student out. If it is a more severe rule, you're not going to give a consequence in front of everybody. You're going to need to pull that student aside, have a conversation with them, and give the consequence privately with them. Check out my Rock Your Classroom Management guidebook for a more in-depth look at how to make sure your classroom management is set up for success. It'll be linked below this video.